So just a little bit about Black Lantern Books. Some of you might know we lost our elder Quasi Nkrumah last December, and with that, if you know Quasi, you know he had always had a book in his hand, right? So his house is no different, wall to wall, shelves all through the house, full of books, tens of thousands of books, and then there's more in the shed out in front, right? So I was asked by his family to secure the books, make sure the books don't go up with the house in sale of the house. So we mobilized a few of the comrades to come and commandeer the books, open a couple storage units, and came up with the idea to have a lending library. Something that Quasi and I were talking about before his passing, but given the immediacy and the time and kind of the resources that we provided, being the books and everything, we just decided to make it happen. So with that, Natalie, myself, Cipriano all got together and came up with the concept of Black Lantern Bookstore, which would be, when we get a location, it'll be a lending library and bookstore all into one. Also act as a kind of organizing space that primarily focuses on Black organizations, Black heavily membered organizations, to kind of bring everybody to the table and just get this liberation thing all figured out, right? I guess once and for all. So this is our inaugural event. Very on point. Very honored to be speaking on the life of Russell Maroon Schultz. Honored to have his family here to speak on that from their perspective as well, and then to have this beautiful hardcover book, just kind of our first presentation. So again, thank you all for coming out for sure. Be sure to tap in with us, Black Lantern Co-op on IG, and we just came out with some tote bags in the back to carry all of your liberation books in the back. So yeah.
Yeah, so with that, maybe we can jump right in. We have with us Sharon Schultz and Russell Schultz III, children of Russell Maroon Schultz. Y'all are, it's like looking into, every wonderful video and every incredible, powerful conversation that I've heard with your father. And it's really wonderful to get to know you all and hear some more. But maybe I'll pass it to you all if you want to introduce yourselves. What are things that we should know about you? What are your likes, dislikes? What moves you? What wakes you up in the day?
I'm Sharon Schultz, the daughter of Russell Maroon Schultz. I'm a New York City retired public school educator. I'm an avid kid for the Panther Cubs, as well as the freedom of all political prisoners. That's about it.
I'm Russell Schultz III, son of Maroon. What gets me going in the day is just the people doing this work. Service to community, my people, family, humanity in general.
And they might be like underselling a little bit. Y'all are like hardworking. The fact that you had a foot surgery and you were still like, oh, the show can't stop. Like, so y'all, can you help me like applaud them for being here? They are not from the West Coast. There's a 3-hour time difference. You're still recovering. It's been, and you've been nonstop. It's been, what cities, would you like to shout out some of the places you've been so far?
We started in
New
New York,
Jersey,
Philly, Baltimore,
DC,
Atlanta,
Texas,
Oakland, and now here.
Yeah. And it doesn't stop, right? So I'm just gonna read really quickly the synopsis of this book. So I'm Maroon is a memoir. So we are going to hear from you, Sharon, on the prologue in a second. But if folks don't know, so Russell Maroon Schultz was, I have so many questions for y'all. I'm gonna try to reel it in because otherwise I'll just keep talking. Was a political prisoner, Black Panther Party member, Black Liberation Army, constantly just breaking out of prison, right? Just like you had free school days because of this too, right? So the man said, I will not be contained. So just really quickly, just to read the synopsis, which I think is better than what I said by a whole measure. It says, Russell Schultz was a gang member in inner Philadelphia starting at age 11. But at 23, after hearing Malcolm speak, he changed his course. Schultz would become a lifelong crusader for justice, a soldier in the most militant units of the Black Liberation Army, and a community organizer who was constantly brushing up against the notorious Frank Rizzo. If folks don't know Frank Rizzo, please and his police commandos in Philly. As the struggle for self-determination among Black communities intensified, Schultz was convicted to life in prison following a coordinated attack in Fairmount Park that left one park guard dead. The prison walls, however, could not deter Schultz's battle for personal and collective freedom. He escaped state prison twice, making him a living legend and endowing him the moniker Maroon, once used to honor runaway slaves from plantations. He survived 22 years in solitary confinement, prompting an international campaign for his freedom. I Am Maroon charts a life of dizzying intrigue and long struggle for liberation. With an unforgettable voice, Maroon reminds us that we too are capable of radical change, leaving us a blueprint for how we might dedicate our lives and minds to the ongoing fight for freedom. What would you add to that? Is there anything that you would like to?
No, I think I would just start with just how it all began, actually. The need to know who my father was. I mean, we visited with him all throughout our childhood, but, those bars couldn't really tell the story for us. For me, anyway, I can only speak for myself. We have other siblings, and we all have different relationships with my father, of course, and all have different feelings about it. But initially, I ended up in New York in the early 90s, and I started meeting Panthers and BLA members, 20th century revolutionaries right on the streets of New York. And they actually knew my father. So I was impressed, I wanted to know more because I hadn't heard those stories. How he could steal a car and he stole the best cars. And I'm like, really, And so I would write him back, like, who's these guys and who's this? And, and we started to dialogue and go back and forth. And he started to reveal some things that, I didn't know about who he was. And as a result, we had this family document that resulted from that correspondence. And later we began to use it for that international campaign. And he linked up with Kanya, who has an introduction here who tells you all how her and my father came together to have what we know now as I Am Maroon. But it actually started off as a family document that I didn't want to give over. But, after my father had been in solitary for 22 years, I couldn't say, no. We needed to do everything we could to garner his freedom. And so as a result, we gave over the family document, and him and Kanye worked together. And like I said, now we have the final publishing of what is I Am Maroon.
Is there anything you want to add, Chris?
No. I'm sure you have more questions.
Oh yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Sure. And yeah, just as a heads up, let's break down the distance between this and this, right? Please feel free to raise your hand at some point. Don't have to wait for Q&A. If something moves you, please raise your hand.
Please don't wait for Q&A.
Yeah. We would love to have it more conversation. So, do you want to kick us off with some questions?
Yeah. So in this book, right, it has a lot of stories about your father, and like you said, it's more of the family document. But is there anything that you wish could have, been more prominent or made it to the book that wasn't featured?
There's too much stuff that's not featured. The other part is, like she said, it was a family document that was wrote years and years ago. And so it wasn't meant for this. So also there's a decent amount of my dad going into transition, having stage 4 cancer, having his first operation in his whole life where they take his intestines, they cut him from here to here, and him dealing with that in the way that he specifically deals with things. His contemplation of mortality in a different way than he contemplated it with fighting cops and gangs, and but a different contemplation of mortality. His last teachings, that are totally different from these, that are totally different from Maroon the Implacable. If you guys don't know, he has another book before this Maroon the Implacable. If you read that, that's different from this, which is different from if you experienced him in the last 15 years or whatever. So yeah, that, but other than that. Yeah.
And then or did you have a?
Yeah, I think he was on an eco, whole environmental climate change. He was, very concerned about the environment and what direction that was going on in the climate. I think that consumed a lot of his life because he was talking about, the struggle and what that would look like, particularly to our youth, and in a world that's ever changing. So yeah, I think that was one of his other things. And he was very different in the end, that's clearly not in the book because he was sick, in the end, which allowed us to fight for his freedom, because the system wasn't able to provide the medical services that he needed. And as a result, my other sister, Teresa, who was also in the struggle with us for many years to free him, our adult life, she came on later in the game, but she was excellent with the health and dealing with the system and healthcare. Because we know healthcare is hard for us. So you can imagine what's going on in an institution in a penitentiary. You're not going to get the healthcare that you need. But then to, have the legal apparatus to come in and challenge them and challenge the judge, because she's like, oh, I don't believe they can't take care of him. No, we're going to let him stay there. Because we had went to them before, like, he's sick, he needs to come home, he needs, this, that, and another, he's not being provided with it. And she was like, no, a sister too. The judge was a sister. And she's like, no, I can't believe that. And so then we had to come back to her. Less than two months, we came back to her and said, and then they got on and said they couldn't take care of him. So she was like, well, then I'm gonna let him come home. And so as a result of that ongoing struggle of freedom, that healthcare played a particularly important role, particularly the communication that's required, knowing the system, and challenging them with the legal apparatus, if you have those, putting it all together to make sure that we get our loved ones home. And it's sad that we have to bring them home dying,
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. That's very real. That brings me to a kind of another thing. In the publishing of this book, I'm sure, publishing companies aren't too excited to get, too active with this kind of material and everything too. So, with all of that included, what was the most difficult part in getting this book published or bringing it to the full picture we have now?
I think for me, it was just the emotional roller coaster because I had to keep reading the edits. So for me, it's emotional roller coaster because he is my father, and on one hand, he's like a superhero, and on the other hand, he was MIA as my dad. So you're balancing, you're juggling, two different worlds in your mind and then in society, So I don't think the book was a hard sell because he escaped twice. So that's a seller in itself, right? Because not too many people escape and be on the run for 27 days. So I don't think, the publishing, but then on the other hand, we're not really publishing Black conscious books like we used to on that level.
Yeah.
So I think, Kanye and I, we worked with, the publishing company as well as, it went out to bid to a couple of companies, and I think timing is everything too, We have all the, stuff going on in our society that my father fought for in the 50s and 60s. And here we are, full circle in 2024, still dealing with the same, things, whether it's a knee on the neck, a no-knock warrant, whether it's driving while black. I mean, we've seen it all over my, decades of fighting for my father's freedom. So, yeah. I'm not sure I answered the question.
No,
You
you
might have
did.
went on a
Perfect.
tangent.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
not
it's
sorry.
perfect.
Okay.
It's perfect.
Okay.
No, she got anything there? Okay.
And I gotta say, for those that don't know, like you all were very active in the Free Maroon campaign. Like this is over the course of years. Like it is very recently that he passed, right? So could you expand a little bit on like what that campaigning looked like, what kind of people were like jumping in for support, and like maybe what changed over the years? Because I know that we're still fighting for political prisoners. We're still having to say people's names. And I know like, you know, Harold Welton, if you want to raise your hand one more time, like, you know, we were doing work to free Rochelle McGee, and that was another one, right? He comes out. And that's it. Like he didn't have more than, I think it was like 80 days with us before he did. So like it is a race against time. And I'm so sorry to phrase it that way because, you know, that's, do you want to talk a little bit about what that organizing was like or like what the campaign was like?
It took different many turns and, you know, strategies and ideologies. And sometimes we didn't agree. You know, you can imagine the family drama, you know, because we all had different ideologies, and even my dad had his own, and you know, so there were numerous campaigns, numerous comrades and people that came on board with the campaigns, and that organizing took on anything from, you know, working with organizations like Jericho, MXG, I mean, you know, going to events. I mean, you know, political prisoner dinners with Mama and Herman Ferguson. I mean, it spanned over from the 90s to, you know, my dad passed in 2021. So picking up families. I mean, at one time, you know, going to the prison, you know, in Pennsylvania, it's only Pittsburgh and Philly that's cities. The rest is rural America. So most of the prisons are there. So getting to a loved one was a big ordeal, you know. So we organized around families, you know, which my father was always calling us to tell us what book to read, what books had to be ordered, who we were sending them to, as well as which one of his comrades or juvenile lifers hadn't seen their own mother or father because they couldn't make it up there. So we took on a host of roles. I mean, a lot of roles. And just, you know, the role of wanting freedom from for your dad was one of the major ones. And we did a lot. And I'm sure I'm missing some things, but the organizations were key, I would say. Family is key. You know, not giving up is key because the struggle is real and it's long. Right? It's a long struggle, and particularly for people of color, right? And people who are oppressed. And I think one thing that we were missing early on is the legal fight. You know, getting those lawyers on board that need to be on board to fight for our political prisoners. And of course, it's always a money game. That's just, we're in a capitalistic society, so that just comes with it, you know. So I don't know if you want to add to that.
A couple of things I would add. Organizing wise, self-critique wise, I feel like I could have organized a lot better earlier on. I think that the culture of organizing, the culture of fighting for political prisoners, the culture of liberation, in those times, and even worse now, had gotten watered down. You know, I mean, watered down to the space where it had just felt like people were more celebratory of freedom fighters and things like that, and not as much actually liberatory in the context of the work that it takes. You know, I mean, it was interesting. We were at Sankofa Books, and Rima make a good point that the political prisoner actually belongs to the family, but actually really belongs to the greater community. You know, all of our freedom fighters. You know, and I agree with that 110%. But I think the other side of that coin is the freedom fighter actually belongs to those who actually put in the real work to liberate them. And that looks a lot of different ways. And especially in my father's situation, it looks all the way to the ways of people like myself and other people who form cells to try to go and liberate them. And that's something that, you know, that's not a part of the lexicon now. And I don't know why. You know, everybody, and we'll get on the tech later, but I feel like we're just in a tech thing. And after COVID, it got even worse. You know, like everybody Zooms, and if you think that's organizing, or if you think you can put a hashtag in front of something and get it going, that has happened and worked and got millions of dollars. But that's not actually organizing. You know, and so, and then there's a culture of exploitation within this work. There's a culture of exploiting political prisoners. There's a culture of exploiting, and I'm not talking about from the enemy. I'm talking about internally. There's a culture of exploiting prisoners. If you know anything about law or anything, there's a term called duress. Anybody heard of duress? So if you're under duress legally, right, you can't do anything. You can't sign paperwork, you can't sign contracts, you can't be in agreements under duress. So my father, these books, Mumia, all of that work and all of this and colleges and all of that, that's under duress. Who's ever doing that with you? We need to look at that and organize in a different way. Maybe organize that way, but also in other ways, but also critique that specifically in the context. I've been around my dad. I've seen him do and say things with people who are unprincipled. He may know they're unprincipled, but he in prison. He ain't trying to get out. He done try to go over the wall. He done try to, I can't get him out. I try to form cells. They ain't good enough. They're not good enough. And so this is a real part of the work now. And the work is, since that moment, the work has changed to a multi-million-dollar style of work. There's a multi-million-dollar kind of conversation around liberation. And it's from movies to everything else in between. Oh, this is written. People tell me, oh, that's written like it's written like a movie or a script or a screenplay, or it reads like a, well, yeah, well, that's great and that's cool. If you break out of jail and all that kind of stuff, it probably would read like that.
You had a question?
Yeah. And could you say your name before your question?
My name is Saeed.
My apologies.
No, you good, man. We're here to hear you, hear about your father.
And thank you, brother. I appreciate you for being here.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for, putting this on. So I did a lot of work with Natul Shakur.
Yes, sir.
Before he, all the time he was in jail, and I spent, a lot of time when he got out of jail, when he was out for about 7 months. And so a lot of the stuff that you're saying, it resonates with me because it sounds familiar. And one of the things that that we used to deal with was when he was locked up, because he was locked up and he was dealing with a lot of, limits on phone time and communication, all those kinds of things of that nature. He would have like 6 or 7 people because he can only get in contact with certain people doing the same job, right? Or trying to accomplish the same thing. And I'm wondering how y'all felt. I don't know if your father did the same thing, but I'm imagining that he was just trying to get a lot done given the situation that he was in. So how he got things done in terms of, like, what was his style of getting things done? Did he reach out to y'all first? Was he reaching out to whoever he could get at to get certain things done from behind the wall?
That's an excellent question.
And how y'all dealt with that as family? Because another thing that folks was dealing with was, once he did get out, certain people feeling entitled right? Because they was getting certain phone calls when, you know, sometimes he was the only person that they could reach out to. So they feel like it was their responsibility, right? When really, you still need to come ask that man's family, are things okay to do and move forward. So can you just speak to that as far as how you may or may not have dealt with something like that?
Yeah, you wanna, yeah, basically, because of what you're saying, certain levels of entitlement, you know, certain levels of culture. There's a heavy Islamic culture in the prisons in Pennsylvania, but heavier in the streets. And that's how the prisons get filled up with, you know, and then that culture of also younger people coming and the Islamic community being a space to reside and a space for safety and a space for them not to be abused in prison. And so that, you know, culture in itself breeds young brothers under, you know, the comrades that feel entitled to them. You know, they was in jail with them. They looked out for them. They, you know, made sure whatever. They took orders for them. They might have did hits for them, you know, all of that. And so, yeah, it definitely was that. But we had, you know, we got 150 cousins, you know, that never met. They, you know, we got 150 cousins, you know, that. So it's a line, even with the OGs and other folks that want to see my dad when he come home. It's just a gang of people just, and some of those people getting cut off. You know, some of them 150 or whatever, because those are just the cousins. That's just our cousins. That's not his sisters, which is 9, and his brothers, which is 3 or whatever. Some of them pass or whatever. But it's a group of hierarchy before it even gets to. So, but it was a lot of tension. It was a lot of tension, and how he got things done. A lot of times could feel and seem unprincipled or unempathetic in the context of using multiple people to get things done, which also says something about the people getting the thing done. So if I can't do the intelligence enough to go through to form a cell, and you got to get another intelligence officer, then that's the problem, right? And so, you know, that went all the way down to buy me a book. And the book ain't here yet, so maybe I'll ask somebody else about a book too. Then we get 2 of them or whatever.
So thank you for this. I teach and I assign my students are starting to read it next week.
Where do you teach at?
I teach at Cal State LA in Pan-African Studies.
And what is it?
Pan-African Studies.
Pan-African Studies. How long have you been doing?
22 years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming.
I brought my son, he brought his son here. One of the reasons both that I assigned the book and then made, whenever he sits up, he can hear, he's pretending like he can't hear. But one of the reasons that I brought them here and why I signed the book is because of your father's story. And so a few years ago, my son and I were able to go to Jamaica. We went to Kampong Town, where Queen Nanny of the Maroons, you know, where they still have not submitted to colonialism, right? And knowing just a bit about your father's story, about how, you know, he earned that name. I believe we live up, if you give someone a name or you take a name, unless we're gonna betray ourselves, we live up to that name, right? And so what does it mean to be a Maroon and never submit to the cage that he was put under? So I just wondered, and I don't know if this was planned, to talk about, if, especially for our children, at a time when, you know, we had this election, and I don't just mean Trump, I mean like what just happened in California with the kind of resurgence of the criminal industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, where they're now taking people who are convicted of nonviolent petty crimes and making them felonies so that they begin to refill those prisons with our people. I think about your father's unwillingness to submit to that system, and I'm wondering if you could talk about what it means for him to live up to that name or rule.
Well, you know, I can think of courage in the face of adversity. Resilience. I mean, he never relented from freedom. Never, ever. You know, going over the walls. I sitting in visiting rooms with him, and he's scoping out the room and telling me to look at the ductwork because that's a starting point. And I'm like, oh, okay, you know. So I would say that resilience, that value of freedom, like whenever there's oppression, injustice, you know, to be an advocate and fight for it. And he believed in that internationally, globally, domestically. He was always conscious of other struggles, not just the Black liberation struggle. So I wanted to say one more thing was resilience, courage, resistance, resilience, and adversity. I think that sums him up. And, you know, when I read the prologue, he talks about, you know, how a barbed wire wall is not something to be feared. It's something to be scaled. I mean, you know, like, how many people say that? I mean, it's like, you know, he never, as a Maroon, you know, he always wanted freedom. And he always believed that people of color, particularly oppressed people, you know, needed to be protected and to be fought for. And he was going to die fighting for that. And basically, his whole life, he fought for freedom. And like you said, he earned that name. You know, that wasn't who he was in the beginning, for sure. And as you go through the book, you know, he's a complicated, flawed, beautifully complex person. You know, it wasn't all great, you know. And I don't want to get off the topic. I'll get back to that. But do you want to say something about Maroons?
Oh,
For a question.
no, I just agree. I don't think we've done enough study on Maroons. I think that the Maroon obviously still exists today. One of the things that happened in my dad's case, and a couple of times, and this is part of my dad's mystique too, and in the line of, you know, shout out to Monster Cody, Shanika, for giving my dad the name, and my dad accepting it, because my dad don't take no name from nobody, the implacable one, you know, and so, you know, and we here, so we should shout out, you know, the brother.
That's right.
And long live his spirit. But yeah, so he, you know, in that Maroon way, my dad would be unbreakable, but then ideologically he would be pliable depending on what the situation scenario called for, what have you. And so on his kind of deathbed, I guess, you know, 52 days or so before him passing, he's in court and they're trying to break him, you know, to come home. And they're like, well, what do you got to say then? Well, you know, is it really bad? Are you really dying? Are you just, you know, he like, yeah, I'm fucking dying. Like, what the fuck? You know, like, what the fuck? You know, and there's still like this part that's like, but I'm not like, you know, like I'm not conceding to y'all specifically. And it's interesting because in the solitary use and different stuff, but in that piece coming home, you know, we had Jalil's papers, we had Herman Bell's papers, we had everybody who had came home and their stuff that they had said to the legal or to the judges or whatever. And so, you know, I looked over all the stuff, it's great stuff. It was great stuff because of the people who it was. Right. And just like how they talking to the state and being like, yeah, but yeah, but nah. You know, that type of wording and ideology. But my dad on the Maroon side was implacable. That's, you know, I think about Mascoti. You know, he was like totally implacable in that part that, you know, you talk about. And I also just want to say quickly, in the work-wise though, and where we are now with, you know, Leonard and Imam, you know, and just, you know, like, I want to be clear with everybody that how my dad came home I don't feel really great about. Yes, I worked, I did a lot, I turned over stones, I got in the bed with cops, I got in the bed with politicians, I got in the bed with fraternities and sororities and people who I said I would never ever work with, right? And he actually came home, and I had never done those things before. So I would say to people, get your ego out of the way and let's do some different kind of work because we're not doing it. But even bigger than that is that we're so complacent that we know that people are old and we're actually acting like compassionate release is a strategy. Like we've all embraced that as like, oh yeah, we could get compassionate release. And I'm just like, that is so weak. And if it was your dad, it was my dad, and people was talking that shit to me, and I was like, get out my face, really. Internally, I was saying, yeah, how do we get the compassion? What's the papers? Let's fill it out, and da-da-da. And we asking the state, right, to let them go, right? Yeah, okay, cool. But in all reality, I was feeling like, we just weak. Just weak. That's just weak. And the lawyers are weak. Because that's not a legal strategy either. Mm-hmm. Don't let no lawyer tell you that compassionate release is a legal strategy. Because it's not.
It's true. Just a heads up, folks, there's 4 chairs in the front. There's a gang of you.
Can y'all please come?
Yeah.
Please, somebody come. Somebody please come down. And be with us more than standing in the back, please.
Yeah, please feel like this is your home. This isn't we're trying, let's be in community with each other. And as y'all are walking, and Sharon, I want you to read the prologue in a second.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I know that Kanya's not here, and that's totally fine, because this is not her story, this is Maroon's story. But first, in the introduction for the book, which is page 1, if folks already have a copy, the opening line really, I love reading the opening line of things. It is, to visit a prisoner is to lose just briefly your own freedom. And I was hoping maybe you can go a little deeper into, and we've asked you, we've tiptoed around it, right? And there's been talks about organizing, and there's been talks about having a father that's just an inspiration to so many, but it's your dad. If you can tell us a little bit about what it was like for you to grow up having Maroon as your father, but and maybe what the expectation, because I imagine and I know we had a brief conversation around this, but there's an expectation that people are like, oh, well, your dad is Maroon, so you're all just like him, right? You're all Black liberation, you're all Panther Cubs, and that's not always the case. But I just wanted to open it up to you all, what was your childhood like generally? What were you most proud of? But also, how did you relate to your father outside of him being a political prisoner and a Panther and a BLA member? What was your relationship like? And I do want to just say really quickly, if y'all haven't heard the I Make What I Like interview with both Russell and Sharon and Jared Ball, I really, really enjoyed the story of sometimes kids will tell you in school, hey, can you tell your dad to jump ship again so that we can have a day off from school. So even things like that, what would you like to share about your childhood? Because it's one thing when you have an incarcerated parent, and it's another when your friends are saying tell him to bust out so we can have a free day.
So what I'm going to do is I'll probably intersect this with the women in the movement, because my mom is part of that conversation, is the part of the conversation of me being a kid. I didn't know my dad. I didn't even think about my dad long until life. I just knew my mom, and she talks about, we did live in, I don't call it middle class, but we did live in a situation where it was a lot of dads. It wasn't like the betrayal that people be like, oh, there ain't no dads. Yeah. No, it was a lot of dads, and one of them happened to be a police officer. My friend Reggie Barnes, his dad was a police officer. Yeah. And every year in school, on the parent come to school day, he would show up in a police uniform. Right. But that was my man's, Reggie, that was my man's, and we played football and all of that. And so, make a long story short, at some point, he forcefully adopted me through pizza, cops, pizza.
Not donuts?
He's like, oh, you want to come over for dinner? I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, pizza. I was like, cool. And so he's like, you can come over every night. I have pizza every night. I was like, pizza every night? He's like, yeah, it's no problem. I was like, well, you make sure you don't miss. I'll come. You don't miss, you know what I mean? And so that's how but he was also a pastor, you know? And so, so I grew up under a police pastor type of dad. I had another drill team, military, soldier type of Vietnam dad. I had all these different, Mr. Jenkins, I had all these different non-biological dudes that were like super giants. And of course they knew my dad, but I couldn't fathom them knowing my dad at that point, and all this stuff that they're doing is, you know, tied to that. And as I got older, I was like, oh snap. You know, but I was trying to be in the streets at some point, and so Papa Barnes, the police officer, lived on the clock in this block in West Philly on 52nd and Delancey Street. Mm-hmm. I wanted to sling on the block, but I would be literally have to sling in front of his house. Yeah. You know, and he would come out and be like, yeah, come here, let me talk to you. Like, what are you doing? Like, you know, and so then I'd be like, okay, until next time, and then I'm back. You know, and so that type of, you know, situation and scenario, but also just like people in the community, and of course, you know, my friend group being like, you know, tell your dad to break out again so when you get out early school, you know, but that would be tied to, you know, Rizzo. You know, everything with my dad was actually tied to Rizzo. Yeah. You know, and tied to a million cops and dogs and the house getting torn upside down and everything splattered and just, you know, and as a kid, you just kind of looking like, you know, like, and our mom was very protective, you know, but the sisters, you know, in this story or backstory or side story or whatever, like we talking about Maroon, but it's no way to quantify the women in the story. You know, so my dad has two families, you know, Sister Love and my mom. And yeah, I mean, it's a lot there. And those women were super, you know, important in his life and affected him in a multitude of different ways, learned a lot, all of those things. Phyllis Hill brought up a shotgun and a handgun to bring into the prison. That's you know, ain't y'all doing that?
Who's doing that?
Anybody bringing in a shotgun into the prison and a gun into the prison? We need to try to figure it out.
Yeah, it's only $25 to go to.
No, but these women were just like a lot of women were, and it's more women, you know, involved. You know, that didn't get to make it to the book. And women after, there was at some point where my dad was going to get married, you know, later in his life, and just the women are really unsung in my dad's. My sister, you know, my other sister. My mom had my youngest sister. We were out all of the stuff with the cops chasing my dad and all of that. My mom left Philly to come to Virginia with her 4 kids. Just had the last one, was the youngest one. And one of her girlfriends said, you know, let me help you with the baby. You know, I'll take the baby today or whatever and watch her and disappear with her. You know. And so we didn't meet my sister back again 30 years later, you know, and so the women again, and being able to nurture her back into the family, teach her who we are, who her father was, and she had went to the military and she was a prison guard. And so all of the dynamics of how those things could have worked out, you know, and conversations with her sisters, with my mom about what happened, you know, and all of those dynamics, but a lot of unsung women in my dad's story. And I can't, you know, my grandmother, my Aunt Saida, my Aunt Sue, you know, just too many women to name that don't really, or you won't hear about in this story, you know.
And there's that saying that, like, you know, when there's a prison in town, the whole town's in prison. When you have a family member in prison, the whole family's in prison, right? So yeah, shout out to all the work to, like, not just like your community, but also like the women in your families that kept his name, your safety, and like, yeah, just wanting to name that. And we talk a lot about that at the Panther Breakfast on Sundays usually. Like the part that we're not hearing about the Panthers is like, we know Huey, we know,
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
we know
Munchie,
all
we
the
know,
cool,
but like
romantic,
Sandra,
sexy,
but Sandra
fly,
Ray, right? Where are the women?
look good.
Yeah, and
you
the
did
ones that are in
this,
prison,
good
it's
stories.
it's true. But please, Sharon, if you'd
No,
like
I
to
just wanted to add on to that my father comes full circle in his life in a book about women too, because the whole patriarchy thing he struggled with, and it was the machismo, the whole, I don't know what it was, but he talks about it in a great deal in the book, particularly the relationship with my mother. There was some domestic violence there. So there's a lot going on as he matures and evolves and comes full circle about his role as a man and what role he played with regards to women and how he grew in that process. I remember, like I said, the family document was some time ago. I was in my early 20s. And I remember, just not speaking with him after I found out all the interaction with my mother, And so I'm like, wow, and I had to get through that, And I think one of the questions you guys had, no, sorry.
No, go ahead, jump ship. Please.
Was some lessons you learned,
Yeah.
And I think, redoing this all over again as a more mature woman than 23 in my 50s now, I'm like, it was a different lens on the book. It was a totally different lens than that 23-year-old, who couldn't believe that, this was my father, who he was, and all the roles he played as a man, because I'm a woman, and I was being raised by my mother. Like he said, that's what we knew, a struggling woman trying to raise her children, And in the meantime, she didn't stop us from visiting him, but she never really let us know about that hurt and bitterness. She walked with it, I guess, so we wouldn't walk with it, and that we could grow up, trying to be free children outside of the headlines cop killer, because when you grow up with that, it's like, woo, and when you don't have a common last name like Jones or Smith, then, it's all over.
Right.
So, when you say growing up as a child, it was definitely comforting that we were in that community, that didn't, what we call today social bullying and all of that. It wasn't the bullying, but it was love from the family that kept us. I know for me anyway, I can't speak for him because he had the same name. So for him, I'm sure it was a totally different, response, and he's a man. For me, it was a yearning as a daughter, for fatherhood. And like I said, those, growing up as a child, it was definitely, hard. It was an emotional roller coaster, but it was also a lot of love there and a lot of knowledge that I probably wouldn't have had if I didn't have a father who was a political prisoner. So, it's one of those double-edged sword things, when I tell my younger self, like, you're gonna be all right. But while you're living it, you're like, so.
To even expand on that, what would be some advice you give to people that want to have families, right, that are in the movement? Probably not to, as you were saying, not to the extent of walking into prison with a shotgun and a hammer, but people that are starting families and in the movement, right? What would be your advice?
That's an excellent question. My advice would be, if you're gonna have the seed, no, don't even have the seed. If you haven't contemplated your mortality, and you're not in a space to give that child that in an educational sense, teach them how to contemplate their mortality, in the context of using their life as a tool for liberation, because that's all we got right now. If you're bringing them in here and you doing some whatever you on, I don't know what you on, but bring them in. But when you bring them in, just be as honest and we can't do what my generation did, which is kind of try to want the best for them and give them what we didn't have. That rubric don't really work. That's not gonna cut it. And some of our youth are upset about that we try to give them that rubric instead of rubric that I'm talking about, like, nigga, you gonna die rubric, like that rubric, which they figure out real quick, like, oh, wait a minute, These niggas ain't telling me I was gonna about to croak, walk out here and they at me, they like at my throat and they trying to placate it. They trying to make it cool for me somehow. But I actually see it.
Like life is sweet. But
You're like, it's not sweet, and I see it's not sweet, and y'all think I'm sweet. So now I'm looking at y'all. Like, actually, y'all sweet for trying to make me sweet. Because I don't need to be sweet. And that's what I'm hearing from younger people nowadays. They like, part of what ownership that I have to have and self-crit is that a lot of my young boys in the streets is saying, Dad, OG, you this and that, and now we see you, da-da-da, but you didn't really drop no jewels on us. You wasn't really schooling us, like really schooling us. Like we wanted to listen. I know we was da-da-da, but if you would have just really dropped it on us, we would have, and so now they leaning in more, but I wasted X amount of years. And they have to do it for the young boys under them. And so, it's just, we're not, I love it. I love the elections and I love all of that because it just makes me have to confront what it really is. And we still got time because they real good at putting the velvet glove on the iron fist. See, Rizzo, that glove out of here. When you see this iron fist, you see this fist? I'm gonna pound you with it. I'm gonna call you all kinds of niggas and all kinds of disgusting terms and talk about your mom and kick you and spit on you. That's what it is, bro. This is what it is. Get used to it. That's what I grew up in Philly. So this guy, who they talking about that y'all, he's not even a military guy. I like military guys. If you're gonna be oppressive over me, at least be a military guy. I know what I'm gonna expect, and I'm gonna give you that back. This guy, I don't know what. I really don't. I wouldn't be surprised if the military guys don't assassinate him at some point.
Sharon, do you want to read? Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, anything. Come on.
Harold, welcome, part of the Coalition for Free Chairman Heath.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, one of the experiences that we had when we knew that Michelle was going to be released, which was early June, we decided that we were going to totally shut down because we didn't want anyone to know that Michelle was traveling or coming home, where she would be, etc.
Smart.
And we had some people criticizing us. They had, I don't know, I've been told that Michelle is coming home and people are not saying this, that, the other. Who are they supposed to be? What were your experiences, if at all, that when you knew your father was coming home?
It was interesting because, like I said, it was a whole health thing. And I sat there and kind of, before he came home, watched my sister negotiate the whole thing over the phone with what they weren't providing him with. And the nurses kind of gave it up because my sister, she would call him every day for the chart, what the status was, where he was, how he was doing. And so they just gave up the tapes and said, we're going to tell you the truth. There's nothing we can do for him. And that's when the legal thing kicked in and everything. So the holdup was, I think, an ambulance. Because the ambulances don't leave the county or something. And he needed an ambulance for 4 to 5 hours. I think he was 4 to 5 hours away.
Same with Matulu, the ambulance thing. Yeah,
right. So it was a whole ambulance thing first, that we knew he was coming home, that he had been released, but it was getting him to Philadelphia. Then going directly to the hospital to make sure, that he had the ankle bracelet and that hospice was going to be in place 3 days a week to provide him with the nutrients for his body because he could no longer eat. Well, he could eat, but he couldn't hold nothing down because of the intestines that had been all cut up. So if it wasn't liquids, the intestines were gone. And so it was just a matter of providing him with those nutrients 3 days a week. So then he finally was in the ambulance and came home. I think we went there that night because he came home to his sister, to his mother's house, which was beautiful in itself to see that full circle, even though our grandparents had passed some years ago. And yeah, the family, like we said, hadn't met him for the most part, my cousins. So this family document was crucial for the family. I had a cousin call me recently, like, girl, you know, the family said this, but this what really happened. Because, you know, family keep a lot of secrets, you know, and those secrets, there are some truth, right? And in that truth, there's freedom, right? So I'm not saying every secret should be told in a family, but some secrets need to be told. And if not for you, for the offsprings, you know, the generations that will come after who didn't get to meet their uncle, but will know he was a revolutionary, transformative figure, and that their legacy is rich, you know, and maybe it can help them as they navigate their childhood, knowing the rich legacy that they come from.
Well, I'm ready to hear you read.
This reading has been
I know. Interesting.
all right, the prologue. I am Maroon. It's a title, an honorific awarded to those who fly the plantation. It's a stripe you earn when you go from being a prisoner to a fugitive. Maroons are runaway slaves. In French, maroon means pharaoh. The Spanish cimarron means wild. To Black people who were chained to the French and Spanish sugarcane fields across the Caribbean and the Americas, to those who tasted the misery of the cotton plantations in southern United States, maroon means freedom. I wasn't always maroon. I was named Russell Melvin Schultz II after my father. Years later, when I converted to Islam, I took the name Harun Abdul Rauf. I'm Russ to my sisters, brothers to my comrade, old head to my corner boys, and daddy to my children. To my captors, I'm inmate AF3855. During trials that lasted years, I was referred to as the defendant. White prosecutors told all white juries I was a criminal. In prison, I was nicknamed Little Dragon. I've been a mailman, a steel worker, a janitor, and a general, and an emir, and a president, and a prisoner of war. I'm 77 years old. I've been incarcerated for most of my life in penitentiaries across the state of Pennsylvania: Holmesburg, Graterford, Western, Huntington, Fairview, Dallas, Rockview, Camp Hill, Greene, Montnoy, Frackville, Cole Township. I escaped from 2 of these institutions. On one occasion, I evaded capture for nearly a month. To be a maroon is to be forever on the run because the overseers never stop chasing them. But they also have to learn to be perfectly still under a pile of leaves with the bloodhounds just inches away. When a helicopter's searchlights sweep over the mountains, maroons must be invisible. They must be able to fight, and they must know when to flee. A wall topped with barbed wire is not something to be feared, but something to be scaled. I paid for those 27 days of freedom with 22 years of my life in the hole. That's shorthand among prisoners for solitary confinement. For over 2 decades, I was locked in a tiny cell, a cage with no human contact. But even in prison, a maroon is a free man. It infuriates his captors that no matter how fiercely they beat him, they cannot break him. This is because maroons are revolutionaries. We are committed, mind, body, and soul, to the struggle against oppression. Maroons seldom act alone. We receive tremendous support from fellow fighters, sometimes from strangers. Safe houses provide food and shelter, and the very earth gives up its bounty to us in times of need. Yet our paths are littered with loss, comrades who've fallen, and families we've turned our backs on along the way. Ours is a hard road, full of stones and thorns. This cannot deter us from our mission. Those of us who've opened our eyes and seen it all, from the plantation to the penitentiary, we know that maroonage is not an option, it's the only way. This is an account of how one man became maroon. This is my story.
How does it feel to say those words? How does it feel to?
It's emotional, you know, because it kind of sums up, you know. And I think he was conscious enough to know that he left us behind, you know. It's a thorny road to be a liberation superhero. Is what I'm going to call him, because he has definitely rebuilt himself as someone who never resisted from the struggle for freedom, and for oppressed people in particular. He's not a criminal. He just wanted to live in a city that had an equal playing field for people of color. And under Frank Rizzo, that was just not the case. And we know that from not only, you know, my father, we know it from Mumia, we know it from Move. You know, Philadelphia under the Frank Rizzo was just notorious, you know, particularly for minority communities and people for color. So for me, it's always an emotional roller coaster. Like I said, even the edits, the reading of it, and just to know that he is my father, and the indomitable spirit that he had. You know, I could never be that maroon, you know, but I can only take from him the life lessons learned in the struggle for liberation for our people who are oppressed. Did you want to say anything?
No, no. I mean, what was the question?
Like, what do you feel like? What do you feel like reading those words or hearing those words?
Oh, well, I wasn't reading the words, but when I hear them, I hear my father, and again, this is not a document that I'm familiar with at all, and I can hear my dad's voice in you know, certain conversations, and I can hear my dad's voice in conversations with Kanye, but I also hear Kanye.
Oh, you want to expand a little bit on that, if you want?
Yes,
Yeah,
she's
please.
the editor.
Yeah.
She's the editor, and so she can't say his words verbatim because it would incriminate some people and all of those things. So names have to be changed, you know, and then there's some flowering to it too. Like when my dad wrote this document to the family, one of the things that after some years of having it and multiple people being like, let us produce it, I'm like, no, you know. I was like, one of the critiques from it, I told him about it. I was like, dude, it sounds really machismo. Like, it just sounds like, you know, it sounds like some of the stuff he's saying is like, and I know you're not saying it from an ego place or whatever, but because it's so incredible, and you're telling it from the I space, you know, it sounds just like, damn, dude, you just sound like you just patting yourself on the back, like break your arm off, you know, like, you know, but it wasn't that really. But if you read it, someone else reading, you keep saying, I did this, I did that, then it could feel like that. I was like, it's cool because it's just for us, you know. But if it was going to be put out in any way, shape, or form, yes, someone would have to make it sound flowery or a little, because some of it was just really gritty and just, I'm telling you what happened. You want to know what happened? Just what happened, you know.
No, it's true, and it's interesting. I didn't mean to make it like, oh no, like, you know,
it's fine.
but it was more like what sets it apart is that it is a memoir that's coming from a document, but it is being edited. So like there is an element that we're going to have a very different relationship than you all, not just because it's your dad, right? But because it's a totally different voice.
Yeah, and so I think, I don't know for you, but what has resonated for me in this specific talk is that when you read it and you're getting all emotional, that can be triggering to other people in the audience and to me also. But I figure my triggering, I don't know if it's different or whatever from yours, but mine's is more connected to in different parts of it actually hearing him.
And maybe that's for me too.
I don't know.
I don't know.
But I just recognized today what it was, and I was like, oh, I can hear him in that piece, in that specific piece. I was like, oh, I can hear him specifically in certain parts, like where he's saying, like, yeah, I'm not. This is who I am actually. You know, I'm not that. I'm this.
Yeah.
You know, that part I know that's my dad. You can't actually change that. You could make it flowery, but it's still saying, I'm this, not that.
Yeah.
And you have to define what this and that is, and then there's not a lot of play in between it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, I think it's either I don't know, but I'm emotional every time I read a passage. And like, I was emotional with the edits. And, you know, so for me, maybe it's some kind of relief and release. Maybe it's some form of grieving. I'm not really sure. And we talked about it. I know we talked about it with you in the car, because every, you know, event, you know, people like, do you want to read? And I'm like, oh, and I'm all emotional every time. And so, yeah, I can only assume it's some kind of relief or a release that's
And
going
2021 is not that long ago.
on. Yeah.
We're talking about a very recent.
Right. And I don't know if I really grieved for him in the sense of booing and crying at the time. And I guess because we ran such a long race with him, you know, our entire adult life, that, you know, I didn't feel a need to say, oh, you know, at funerals, you'd be like, oh, well, I didn't do, but we had did mostly the whole life, you know, our whole adult life. And at some point I was like, yeah, I'm ready to do me, you know, and get my mental health together and just do me. And so, you know.
Somebody asked in one of the launches, I forget which city it was or whatever, they asked some type of question, like, and it was an interesting question, like, was it that, because I don't know, whatever, but I know she told me she didn't grieve in a certain type of way, and I know I didn't for sure. But the person asked, did we think that was because we had basically prepared ourselves against the state for inability of possibly him not getting out. So when he did get out, we were just already, you know, built over 30 years of just like, we prepared for whatever way, even though we're working to get him out. If he don't, then we, you know, whatever. And I was like, no, I never really thought of that, but I'm sure, yes, I have that too. But more than anything for me was I've had a spiritual experience maybe a year before my dad transitioned. But I was kind of like, I was looking at it like, it's cool, but some of the people we dealing with is corny. I was like, this is the corniest, I ain't gonna say the curse word, this is the corniest stuff, whatever, right? But it was like a whole spiritual committee, right? So we had the Maroon this, we had the Maroon that, we had the Maroon spiritual committee. So on Mondays, we would make prayers and we wear white and we come to events, blah, blah, whatever. And so make a long story short, I had a comrade, Marpessa, from the Mumia campaign and from my dad's campaign, who, for lack of better terms, was the first person that any of us, my dad, a whole bunch of people, and this was back in the day when the internet first dropped. She had a listserv and we didn't know what that was. We didn't know what that was. You know, but it was global too. Like she had people in France, she had people in Spain, she had the Mumia connection, she had and she was like communicating with people and being like, oh, these people over here said this and that. I'm sending your dad's work over there, and they came by and they sent back and they back. And we was just like, what are you doing? Like, who are these people? How you you know? And she would just have stuff, information, and we'd be like, so I met some people from the Basque Country. They end up sending some money in the mail, which was obviously it was back then.
Yeah, right.
Right? Because the money actually got there in the mail, and I was looking at it like, oh my goodness, people sent like thousands of dollars in the mail from Basque Country, from Spain, and it got here, and it's actually in my, I'm like, and I can't read the whatever it say, I gotta go and get it, you know. And so, but at any rate, I'm just like, the work that is going into it and how this person affected me, and they were passing away and somebody told me they were passing and I got mad. that the person was like, oh, they about to die. And I was like, please don't say that. Why are you saying that? Whatever, whatever. And I said, I'm gonna say a prayer for them. And this prayer changed my life. And so I look back on the work that was being done for my dad spiritually, and I was like, oh snap, I'm lunching and I gotta lean in. Like I was like, oh snap. And so I began to lean in differently that way, but also just in my life in general. And one of the most important downloads in that spiritual experience was contemplate your mortality. And so my dad too, I remember, I never forget, this was a funny thing to me with my dad, because none of this was my dad. My dad's last teachings, which I'm gonna put out at some point, but none of it was him. None of this last stuff was him. But it's people in their last days, whatever. So at one point, somebody came and told me, might have been Gotti or someone, I don't know who it was, one of my comrades or somebody was like, your dad told me he saw the angel of death. And I wanted to laugh in their face. I wanted to laugh in their face, but I did not, and I was like, oh snap, so I went and see him or whatever, and he was on that. He was on that, but he had been on that before he saw the angel of death, but he had been on that, but then when he saw the angel of death, he was on another level, and everybody who came in, he would be trying to get them to take their shahada, he'd be like, did you ain't Muslim, you don't want to be Muslim, did you talk to your God, do you know what you're going to do when you die, and just on and on and on ideologically about death. Like my dad was a strong ideological, if you read Maroon and Flappy, you read this, you'll see his ideology is very, very tight and very, very well thought out and very militaristic and very, strategic. And that was how he was dying. He was like, kind of like, I think that. I'm like, bro, it's cool. And all these folks, I see you trying to make sure that and I see what you're doing, and he was trying to do it in the last little bit. It was only, he was like, and I'm like,
planning for the test, the last.
Yeah, I'm like, I hear you, I got it. Yeah, he was like, this last one, I got to really, y'all not even, and I'm like, yeah.
Any questions? You have any questions?
Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
So I know, like, the last few years, right? I know your father's a part of the Black Liberation Army.
Mm-hmm.
And last few years, we done lost. And I can think of 3 prominent members, from your father to Sekou to Matu. So I'm wondering, what's y'all's take on, just all of that, like their relationship, if you know anything about their integral relationship. That's one question I have. I would love to hear, anything, or if you have any thoughts, or if your father had any thoughts between him and Matu and Sekou. And then what's y'all's take on the time, as far
What
as
time?
their release?
Oh.
I know it was, around compassionate release and all of that kind of thing, but even that's kind of like, they hated these rebels.
Yeah, no
So,
doubt.
like,
No doubt.
what's y'all's take, as a family on why they released, why these members of the Black Liberation Army were released when they were, and if you know anything about their relationship with each other, like if their father ever spoke on their relationship with each other.
You want it?
No, you can't. You gonna go.
So my dad had a lot of different relationships. I know you probably saw that interview it's the only interview of my dad with Daruba. Have you seen that?
The one,
I had
yeah.
Oh, you guys see this one?
We posted it in our stories today.
Yeah. So that John is deep because shout out to Paper Tiger, Deep Dish TV, DD Alec, all them folks, they was pre-indie media and all that. And so they had lied to the prison and told them they was like ABC or something. And they was like, yeah, we want to come do a hit piece on this dude. And so they let him in with Daruba as the interviewer. So they ain't do their homework. Because if they would have did them, they'd say, oh, this guy just got a J, just came back from, he was just on the stage with Mandela. And what y'all trying to do? But they let Daruba in and the crew and whatever. So they in there, and they filming whatever. And Daruba honestly didn't know, and Daruba's not a not knower. Like Daruba knows,
Yes, sir.
And so, but because of my dad and his little squad then, and someone was from New York, young cats too, but very, very dangerous cats. But they showed up. They knew Deruba was locked up in the Bronx Detention Center, and they showed up to break him out, but he didn't know. So he was like, God, what's going on? They like, if that nigga don't come out that cell, type, but he didn't, because it could be life or death or whatever. So they having a conversation. My dad like, yeah, what happened? He's like, oh. He's like, we sent you some tungsten blades to cut yourself up too. Joint, like, that's us. We waiting, and we like, and so yes, they do have relations, but that wasn't a relation that Deruba even knew. It's that you that, I'm this, I do this, you in there, I'm coming to get you. The communication may be whatever it is. You don't know who's sending you the blades, you don't know who, whatever. But, so that, also, everybody from Jalil and, of course, Matulu, these, folks just knew about my dad, and they would try to reach out to him. Folks would kite it and triple triangle, communications to folks. But it was tough, it was tough for my dad to communicate with folks. But also one time there was some riots, prison riots, called the Camp Hill riots. And that shook the nation, where they thought that, my dad and some other folks, key folks in the prison systems nationally were plotting, which they were. And so when this Camp Hill riot happened, they were saying, that's them trying to kick this thing off. And so they rounded them all up, and so a lot of them ended up in Fort Leavenworth, so my dad, Leonard Peltier, so he got to, kick it with all of these dudes. And, I happened to go out there during that time. And so I got to be in the visiting room with a lot of them dudes, but also with my cousin Masai, who was my Uncle Saeed's son. And my cousin Masai was so in the streets, we were both in the streets, but he was deeper in the streets than I was, to the point to where, and this was back, he was like on lean back then, like to the point to where we got out there and he was lick drunk and he fell in the thing and busted his mouth, and we had to take him to the dentist and all this stuff. He ended up couldn't get to see his dad, and then he ended up getting murdered in the streets, so his dad didn't really get to, and I had brought him out there for that, and but yeah, it were interactions, but they weren't easy, and a lot of them weren't on the street. I'll talk to you afterwards, but some folks that my dad rolled with, and they were BLA, but they stayed low, and some of them got caught up in San Francisco style stuff, and so they just, a lot of them cats stayed away too, because they recognized that the state would bring out grand juries and all that kind of stuff, and it's never really clear,
Yeah, and what's your name, by the way?
I'm Will. How y'all doing?
Hey.
How you doing? I want to ask one thing I thought was interesting when they were talking about the impact on the offspring of political prisoners. And I'm curious, like, for you all, as teenagers and becoming young adults, when you would run into other children of political prisoners in Philadelphia, because it's a fair amount. Because I'm wondering what would that be like? Especially if maybe like certain families were connected more than others. Just the whole environment of Philadelphia and like being offspring of political prisoners.
So are you, just for clarity, you're not alluding to move or anything like that? Do you count them as that, or you don't count them as that?
Definitely. But yeah, just in general, being in Philly at the time and coping with the reality of your father being away, but then having to be within the community, meeting others. What was that like? Like it was almost like a certain, like only certain people were going through this experience.
Sure.
And in Philadelphia, it's really in your face. It's really blatant. Like what happened.
Yeah, I don't really think I got it like that in Philly. For me, it was more in New York. But in Philly, I would say the connection, of course, with the Mood family. But the rest was basically our family who hovered around us and kept us close with regards to, the political ideology that was a part of my father's narrative, besides cop killer, you know what I'm saying? Because as children, that's what we saw in the newspaper, You know what I'm saying? More so than anything positive. It was nothing positive, of course. So for me, I don't recall connecting with a lot of children that were children of struggle growing up in Philadelphia. Because you have to remember the 70s were a different little time too, you know. And the only kids I do really remember are the Move kids, but that was a little bit after, you know, us, because we're a little older than them as well. So I remember more of a connection in New York, meeting children of struggle in New York, because New York was just more conscious than Philly. Philly was beat down from the Rizzo era, those years. You know, and I'm not going to say all the way beat down. Maybe I wasn't privy to some of that. Maybe my brother was more privy, but for me, it was more New York. And I ran into people like Safia Bukhari's daughter, Wanda, all other kinds of children of struggle, particularly BLA and, you know, BP members, their children. Or even if I didn't know their children, I was closer with their parents, you know, because when I got to New York, Safia was like, oh, come, I'll help you. And Ali Bey Hassan was like, yeah, I'll help you. And so I tend to be more closer with the elders than with their children. I'll say that.
Yeah, my experience was a little different, specifically in the context of definitely the Move family, but also other children of struggle who just, and I'm writing about this too, but that just, and this is an interesting thing, movement work-wise, and something that we should work on is figuring ways to, for lack of better terms, level the playing field. Yes, Maroon is who he is, and Matulu is Matulu, and you're not going to be Matulu, and you're not going to be Mumia, and yes, they deserve their spaces, but because they also come from an organization that was national, and an organization that had rank and file, and an organization, we didn't even talk about the BLA, you know, but I've met children in Philly, Marcus Shell, you know, Move family members, people who families don't have no name.
Freddie Burton.
You know, Freddie Burton, people, all of these people we name, their family got names. You know, it's a ton of folks whose family don't have no name. You know, but their family was just as right in the movement, did work, did quality work or whatever, but they did not, you would not know their name. You know, it's like Phyllis Hill. She took hammers into the prison. You don't know her name. She is as qualified or more qualified than most or many. But you do not know her name. Don't know what she looked like, ain't no books, ain't no statues, ain't no carvings, none of that. She's a soldier's soldier. You know, but so yes, in that way, I would love to see movement-wise us celebrate the Maroons and the Matulus and the Mumias of the world, but also make sure that we level the playing field specifically for folks who don't have those names, put in super quality work, and we know it or whatever, because it's a thing in the movement too, where we have kind of foot soldier people. And you know that, you know, and they known for doing what they do. And this one right here is one of them, right? That one gonna just do work and whatever, and you gonna say, let me help you, and they gonna be, nah, blah, they gonna get it done, blah, blah, blah. And you may have to say to them like, yo, you need to blah, 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 and let him do da, da, da. Or let her this time. Or let me take the notes this time and do some admin or whatever, because my admin skills is not blah, 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 but my hands is good or whatever, you know. And so that's what we're not doing. And it's just continuing on kind of sort of in this neatly packaged, you know, this is how the work get done, because how else are we going to do it? You know, if we don't, you know, so we have to kind of work a little harder than that to break folks out of, and then there's obviously some gender dynamics there too, some male and female stuff. You know, it's gotten better, but can it be worked on more? Of course.
Yeah. And I'll just add that, you know, for me, I've just been trying to be in solidarity with children of struggle, Panther Cubs. You know, when I say Cubs, children of Panthers, Black Panther members. And it's a difficult thing because every child has a different scenario with their parent. Some of them don't even speak to their parents. Some of them like, y'all spent 30 years on your father. Yeah, well, that's what we did. For us, it brought some value to us for knowing that. I don't know what value it brought, but he was our father, and we felt some commitment to the injustices that he was going through, particularly, the solitary confinement. We're not saying, anything other than treat people with some sense of humanity. And I think for me, the justice system just does not cut it where that's concerned. And if you're a political prisoner, you really, really get the short end of the stick. And if you don't have family fighting on your behalf, or even if it's not family, if it's comrade supporters, that's not looking out for something for themselves, then you need all hands on board. So for me, every year or for several years, I tried to do some kind of Panther Cub event so we can come together because, my brother always talk about the mental health and welfare, because I'm sure there's some mental health issues out there for many of us children. I'm tearing up every time I read a passage. So there's something going on, And of course we need to, just try to come together in solidarity and, hopefully just not be our parents because, for me, I can't be Maroon, but I can take those life lessons, like I said earlier, and try to do my best to do the right thing, for that moral humanity that we all cherish as human beings.
I think they call it complex PTSD, by the way.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Very complex.
1 second, we have a couple of folks, and then we have 3 questions, and then we'll start wrapping up.
We want to take a group picture, please.
And
Yeah,
we want
for
all
sure.
the questions. We want all the questions, please.
First Harold Taylor, then Harold Welton, and then whoever was on this side. Elman.
I just wanted to add something to what you two were saying about children of political prisoners. Myself, my experience being a political prisoner, and a member of the Black Panther Party of the LA chapter, and a member of the Black Liberation Army, I had to suffer a lot of different things with my children. Now, I never had to go to prison, but I've spent a total of 7 years in and out of county jails, fighting cases pertaining to different cases I had, from 187s to police officers to assault police officers. But my relationship with each one of my children changed. And today I have a daughter now that doesn't hardly even speak to me. And I can sympathize with what you guys are saying because living that life the way I lived it, you had certain things you could do and certain things you couldn't do, and you had loyalty to a group of people. But there was those who knew and them that told didn't know, and the ones that did tell didn't know either. So you had to keep things within the house. And we moved in small groups in cells. And we had educational classes where we taught each other on how to live underground and how to survive. And how to deal with those conditions when you were captured. And to be arrested, to expect to be away from your family, to be threatened. So I could see everything that you're saying and what you had to struggle with. I was so happy that you two came to say these things, because these things are a lot of young children didn't have anybody to come speak in their behalf. I'm like a Chip, Romaine Chip is he was the first political prisoner out of LA County. When the first Panther political prisoner went to death row. Chip went in prison in 1969. I was in the party at the time Chip went, and Chip died in prison. Noah Washington died in prison. I didn't know he was part of the same group I worked with.
Hugo Pinnell.
But so many of us died in prison. So many of us and like I said, there's still some that's still out that we can't talk about. People ask us questions, we don't want to answer.
We can't even talk about it.
Because you don't want to say something that's going to harm somebody who's still living.
That's right.
And still can be arrested.
And Harold, you're talking about specifically BLA, right? Because
Right.
you're not, that's still, we know some people, but we don't know the real breadth and depth of how many people were in the BLA.
Right, nobody knows that.
Right.
They were sales across the country.
Right.
And it was supposed to be that way. That way nobody can form upon another cell. No other cell should know where another cell is surviving
Mm-hmm.
or living or how they work.
Mhm.
And that's how we were able to survive for so many years. The Black Liberation Army came into effect in 1967, but the Black Liberation Army has always been here. The Black Liberation Army became here the first time they took the first black person off of the continent of Africa. That's when the Black Liberation Army came into existence. The Black Liberation Army will still be here until liberation is called black people in this country, all oppressed people within this hemisphere. That's what I just wanted to add.
I appreciate it.
Something-
I appreciate it. I appreciate
Harold Walton.
Okay, relating to the above ground rank and file Black Panther Party member. In late 1969, J. Hoover and the local police around the country started physically attacking Black Panther Party headquarters, Fred Hampton, in December 1969. LA chapter, December 1969. Moving into the 1970s, we had Detroit chapter attacked by LA people, not LA people, Detroit police. We had North Carolina, I forgot what city, where the police attacked the North Carolina chapter. And then we had the Philadelphia chapter, where what we was calling Bozo Risco. The chiefs had the comrades after the attack, they had comrades that would
Take off all their clothes.
come out naked, right?
Mhm.
And so I want to know, I said all that just to say, did you know any, did you come in contact with any of the comrades out of Philadelphia?
Yeah, definitely Reggie
Reggie
Shell.
Shell.
Definitely, there's a brother named Kamal. There is a brother named, what's Todd's brother name? I always forget his name. But yeah, it's quite a few of my dad's comrades and folks, just Philly folks that, yeah, are more unsung, you know, but yeah, a ton of them. And Captain Reggie Shell is probably the most, you know, decorated and well known, and kind of responsible for reaching out to my dad and them, because my dad and them were known, they were from West Philly, Reggie and them was from North Philly, but my dad and them was known for like just having a military stance. They had weapons, they had organization, they had promotion structure, you know, and so the Panthers in Philly was like, because my dad and them technically weren't Panthers. You know, the Panthers in Philly came to them and was like, yo, this is crazy. Like, y'all, you know, and help us train and whatever. And my dad was like, of course, you know, whatever. But that's how they became Panthers. You know, and that wasn't totally uncommon, even for people in prison and all of that. And I love King and them, Albert Woodfox and them story in that context, you know. One thing I want to leave with y'all for sure is, yes, I'm going to let that question go first. I have my thought.
Question.
So I had.
And what's your name?
My name is Ahmed. Ahmed.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
For coming to talk, speak to us, making time. I had two questions.
Sure.
And either of you can answer those questions. First one is, just growing up, what do you guys have any kind of resentment on your part, or like for him, you know, being involved in this, or just being involved in, like, you know, Black liberation, and how did you guys reconcile that over the years? And that's the first part of the question. And the second part is, in terms of having spent most of your adult life, or most of your life, just knowing him through visits and just periodically, was there a change of perception about him? Like, you know, when he finally came home, you guys got to spend more time
That's an
with him
excellent question.
as the days went by, and like dealing with, you know, his impending mortality.
Yeah. You want?
Well, I can't answer the second one, and then you can restate the first one. But
Yeah.
he was definitely not the person I knew when he came home. You know, I mean, I think the toll that the cancer took, just the whole medical situation, just trying to get him out, I think took a toll on all of us, you know, for sure. But for him, I think it took a greater toll on him because, as my brother said, you know, when you're contemplating your life at the end of your life, I'm sure it's a lot going on there, and he was just not the person I knew in the end. But what was good about it was that he showed me that, in the end, you're going to be thinking something different other than, because in the end, you don't know where you're going to be. You don't know how it's going to come, what's going to go. And he did call me, saying the angel of death. And I'm like, my dad, the angel of death? Like, I didn't expect to hear that out his mouth, is what I'm saying. It was like, okay. So yeah, he was definitely a different person, but I guess I overlooked all of that because he was home. But we did discuss it after the fact that, Danny was not the person. He was, because like he said, we all had different relationships with him. And my relationship, was one of trust and, confidant for many years, So yeah, it was not the person I thought. And the first question was,
there resentment when you, like any kind of resentment for his absence?
of course.
And how do you guys reconcile?
Yeah, of course. Of course. A lot of resentment, I think, as we said, we grew up in an area with a lot of two-parent households. You were one of the few that, didn't have a father in the home. And so to watch your mother struggle to raise you, puts on a whole dynamic for women, the worth of a woman. And he talks about the unsung, women in the book, but particularly watching, my mother gave me strength too, to know that, I could make it. And like I said, I was just happy that, she was bitter, she was hurt, but we didn't get all of that from her until we got older, where she felt we could, I guess, handle it, But growing up, no, we didn't get any of that from her. But yes, the resentment was clear for me. I mean, most little girls want their daddy. They want, it's a lot that comes with that, That's the first man in your life. They give you that direction, with relationships, the whole nine. I mean, yeah, I think I missed a lot. But then on the other hand, I gained a lot, So I don't know how you weigh that out because, when you have somebody that's fighting on the behalf of the people, I mean, that's like, and you ready to kick your family to the curb and everybody else to keep that fight going. So you got to respect that on some level, on a great level, to a great extent. And like I said, I think I didn't get that. I matured with that, It's been a process. It's been a learning process for sure. And I think I wouldn't have the political ideology and I wouldn't be who I am without who he was. So, yeah.
I want to just say quickly two things. One is that I was resentful a lot of times until I got to that spiritual experience. But the resentment was for things like when I figured out that he was abusive to my mom, And I went right up to the prison. And I was mad young, and I was like, dude, you in for it. Like, bro, I am so diesel right now, and I'm so young and feral, and just like, bro, like, I'm gonna run through you. I don't care what Maroon and all that, like, it's not even, I don't even care. But I love the way he diffused to me, and I still, I be doing it today to people, you know what I mean? And it ain't nothing super duper magic or nothing, but it's just a thing, And it's an accountability and ownership thing. Like I was like, yeah, man, my mom told me blah, blah. He was like, yeah, I did that and I own that and I'm not proud of that and I was wrong for doing that and whatever I can do to right that, And I was just like, nigga, I thought we was going wrong. And I was like, oh, shit, what do I say to a motherfucker saying that? I was like, well, why would you accept it, I guess? And now we're going to sit through this visit, I guess, just in quiet because, all right, so then we have to talk about, what it looks like to become a dude who's not physical to women like that. And how do we teach my son and moving forward and folks to, and how, what the modeling looks like. And so intersectionally with the spiritual piece, when he got to the end and was passing away. And so when she gets emotional reading and stuff, like a download came to me and was like, tell people, you know, that if you're sad about Maroon's passing, you have that and you can own that, and everybody has their different ways of dealing with things. But if you miss the opportunity to celebrate a freedom fighter, and I mean to really celebrate them, not just to be like, oh, you did, but to be like, yes, motherfucker, you did it. You know, like we see you without all of the tears and all that, and like you modeled it from, you know, ain't nothing to be. I was like, I'm about to pop one and I need a cigar because I spent 30 years trying to get this dude out of prison. He out, he done transitioned, everything is wrapped with a bow and a package, and it's all over. All of the work and everything, he liberated, bang, bang, bang. If we want to do books and all of it, it's over. So that's why I have problems too with folks and, again, movement, right? So as soon as anybody die, we gotta be on this now. Mumia, whoever, when they die, right? Instant GoFundMes. Just show up. Devoid of the family, anything. That's just something we have to stop. And we have to know that it's happening immediately. As soon as you heard that, that first thing you should be like, shut that GoFundMe now. Make sure it's the family and not, you know. And it's vicious. Other accounts, it's just a whole hustle. This is a hustle. It doesn't turn into a hustle.
Yep.
People in other countries and all that got Maroon pages and whatever. Because that's just what it is. That's where we live in. That's what we deal with. And if we don't be on it, a lot of times they don't have a family. Everybody don't got a support and a family and all of that. So they just gonna get thrown out. And even when you got a family, these people will get on you, get to your family member inside, and start dealing with them, offering them concessions, putting stuff on their books, giving them bread, whatever. And they under duress. So don't blame them. Blame the people coming unprincipled to them, knowing that they under duress, and talking about sign this contract. Sign your image and your rights over to me, so when you die, I got your picture and I can keep Mumia it until the day of no more Mumia, black dread looking thing. I got all that imagery. It's this. So the same thing that Little Richard was telling you is the same thing that Prince is telling you. If you ain't learned, it's the same thing Dave Chappelle is telling you. They got contracts that say, we want to own you throughout the known and unknown universe in perpetuity. These are legal terms. This is in a contract. I had this contract with my daughter. I was trying to get her to be a model and to get some money for college and all of that nonsense. And when I read that, and she was going to be for Nickelodeon, they was pitching her, and she was already in readings and all of that for the real life Dora Explorer. They want the sitcom for Dora Explorer. But you got to do stuff like sign that. You got to do stuff like, oh, we're going to take your daughter in this room. She can't act around you. You man, oh, man. Oh, you going to take my daughter in a room and talk about, no, that's not, we ain't never doing that. So she ain't never going to get nothing. She ain't going to never get college. She ain't never going to get nothing. I guess she ain't getting nothing. Then come on, we can wrap this whole modeling, little kid, TV acting, we can wrap that up.
As we begin to wrap up, we want to know what's next for you all.
We'll be in New Orleans
Okay, right on.
in
Continuing the
December.
book tour.
It's part of the book tour. Can we get pictures for y'all leave?
Yeah, before you leave.
Before you leave, can we get this group picture?